Hi everyone, thank you for coming out and thank you for tuning in. I'm Sarah, I'm the librarian here at the American Saddlebred Museum. I've been working here since January for an 18-month grant-funded program. And since January, I've basically been organizing, cataloging, preserving everything here in the library. When I first started, it was a very interesting room. I wish I had before and after photos to kind of show what it looked like when I first walked in to what it looks like now. In the mix of it all, I completely forgot to take photos of that, so we only get to see the end product. But basically when I walked in, a lot of the books, magazines, sales programs, all of that sort of stuff, there was a bit of a foundation for it. It was very clear that someone had come through and they had alphabetized it, everything like that, but it had been remained untouched for quite some time. So basically what I did when I came in is I just reorganized it, recatalogued it, updated it so it was very accessible for the people who work at the museum as well as people who come in with research questions or just if they're wanting to look through them, like things like that. Just wanted to make sure that it was very clear and easy and usable. And so basically, as I've kind of mentioned, I've kind of categorized it into like three big categories. We have books, periodical, and then what I call audio-visual materials. And so the books that are over in the back corner there, we have about 500 of those. And so I worked on those. All of them have Library of Congress call numbers, which basically meant that I went around and I looked through the subject matter, the content of all those books, and I categorized them based off what they were discussing. And that took a pretty big chunk. That was one of the largest projects of this whole endeavor. Because part of that was I also did a online management system for those. So for patrons who are looking for a research question that is actually accessible online at some point once we get it up and running, it was through a program called Library World, which basically meant that let's say if you're at your house on your computer and you want to make sure that the museum has like a book that you're looking for or like a specific subject matter, you can actually look at it from your own home to kind of figure out sort of where to even begin for your own personal question. And so one of the little visual materials I have is sort of an example of that. And so basically we have a saddlebred book, and so I have it's a little post-it note in the corner, but this is the LOC, Library of Congress call number. And so one of the biggest challenges for that specific project was a lot of the Library of Congress call numbers, they are all registered under SF, which is, what was it called? Animal culture is SF, except all of the Library of Congress call numbers are organized under SF 285, which is just general horse works. However, for this, it does not work out super well for that because we are a special library specific looking at American Saddlebred horses, and it's tough to organize things if they're all labeled under just general horse works. Would be difficult to do that. So part of the project for that specifically was looking at the content and then narrowing it down to give it a more specific number. And so if you look at the back wall, a lot of the books you'll see are like grouped together differently. And so those groupings are different content matters, and so I've organized it based off specific horse breeds. I have different artworks, geography, both local and global, and then I have other things like photography and things like that kind of separated to really make sure that when someone accesses the library, it's more narrowed in focus so that way it's more convenient to find things. In the back wall also I have it separated by sales programs. Those are in the closed top boxes over there. Everything there is alphabetized, which is really easy to look through if you're having like a specific farm or a person or even like a sale. You can just go in and they're easy peasy right there. I've done the same for the show programs that are along the back wall there as well. That's a work in progress. But once we get to it, everything will be alphabetized. Very simple. One of the things that I kept in mind while doing that entire process is I wanted to make sure that the items that were frequently in use, and those for me were the show programs. I know Amy uses them a lot for her exhibits, like social media posts. A lot of people who have actually called in asking questions, usually for things like that, are looking for pedigree or sales information. And so I wanted to make sure that the sales programs and the show programs are very basically front and center, like very easy to access, easy to use. That's a really big thing and something that I think is important to kind of focus on when building a library. It's not just about the preservation, but also the accessibility and the usability of the items. And so the other section behind me is the periodical section. It's probably the largest portion of the library that we have. We have about, I want to say, close to 200, no, probably closer to 2,500 magazines, which is quite a bit. We have a very extensive history. The three largest collections that we have are Horse World, which are off in the back corner here. We have National Horseman, which I believe we have it since the very beginning, since the start, and it goes up until present time. Pretty much the same for the Saddle and Bridle, and then lastly we have Saddle Horse Report, which we get almost bi-weekly. It's been so large that I actually, where did it start? Over in the back corner for the more recent programs, I've started putting them in little storage boxes so that way once we get a program I can just plop it in there and it's yet again right at hand for when I need to pull it back out to look through things. We do have some smaller programs we have Show Horse, we have Sportalog, which that was one of the more interesting ones that I started when I worked through, because we have Sportalog and then we also have the Kentucky Horseman and the American Horseman, which when I was coming in I was not super familiar a whole lot with the foundation and the founding of a lot of these magazines, and so it was very interesting to see how one name would pop up and it would be almost exactly like the other name. And so when I was looking through it, I found out the history of Sportalog, Kentucky Horseman, and American Horseman, meaning that the Kentucky Horseman was first, and then it changed its name about 2 or 3 years after it started to the American Horseman, and then about 5 years after that change happened, the American Horseman joined forces with Sportalog to form the American Horseman Sportalog. So we have the collection of all those, and then we also have the joining of the two and the collection up until present time. So it was very interesting to kind of like learn the connections and sort of like the spider web of all of that, and so to be able to know that, so when someone comes asking a question, I'll be able to give them that history as well as hopefully an answer for what they're looking for.
I have a question.
Oh, yep.
How many of them, other than the Saddle Horse Report, still exist? They're still being published? Any of them?
We do have the Saddle and Bridle is still in publication. Same for the National Horseman. Horse World is also.
Really?
We have Bluegrass Horseman, which also comes in pretty frequently.
Okay.
On top of that, let's see. Show Horse, we also get a couple of those. I believe it's about once every month. Okay. So a lot of the publications are once a month. The Saddle Horse Report is almost bi-weekly. It kind of fluctuates depending on it. Yeah. We do get a lot of those. There's quite a bit for the Saddle Horse Report. But other than that, a couple of the other magazines, they're no longer in publication, but we do have a small collection for those as well. Like I said, I think our collection spans, I don't even know, I think the earliest we have is the Rider and Driver, and that began in the early 1900s, and so I think we have the publication for 1911 up until I believe it's like the 1950s or so. That's no longer in publication, but we have a pretty good chunk of their collection. That's the oldest, and then we have present times with the publications that are still ongoing today. So we have some of those. Like I said, we have the books, we have the periodicals. The other big section that I have, it's my little work in progress over in the corner here, is our audio visual materials. And so those are CDs, DVDs, film reels. We have a couple floppy disks, which I've never used before because I'm
too young.
A little too young for that for me. But we have cassette tapes, hard drives, or different things like that. I have a little show and tell for like a film reel. This is actually a My recording for his state fair performance in 1965. Wow. I believe Amy used it over in her My exhibit for some of the film that showed on the TV screen that plays. This is the original recording of it, which I think is very neat to kind of have and to showcase. You know, from having it as a film reel to taking it onto a TV screen is a pretty cool crossover. But we have a handful of those. A lot of them are state fair recordings and horse show events of different horse breeds. A lot of the DVDs that we have and CDs are also recordings of state fairs and competitions and things like that. Some of the more interesting things that I kind of think are a little bit funny every time I see them is we have a cassette tape collection that are all music recordings for people to perform to during the horse show events. So we have like people's mixtapes for when they played and did all that. So I love looking through those and kind of checking those out. But we do have a quite extensive collection as well for audiovisual stuff that I'm in the process of rehousing and going through. That's sort of the last step that I have. That's the last step for rehousing a lot of the things. The books typically didn't need a lot of rehousing. There's a couple of them that I've done. The rarer books, yet again, those are 1900s, even before that. The oldest book we have was published in 1740. It's a very old book that I have in a box behind me right there. It's so old that the cover is kind of tearing apart, so it can't really stand like most books do, which is why I've wrapped it up pretty much in tissue paper, and it's gonna stay out of the light for the longest time so it doesn't disintegrate. But we have the older rare books that are going to be housed downstairs in our archives to stay away from humidity and all that sort of stuff. We have books from, I think it's like 1902, 1911, 1920s, things like that, that I've taken steps to kind of prevent further disintegration almost of the covers. I've wrapped those up in essentially, it's e-flute. It's a very thick, almost like cardboard-like paper, and so I've wrapped it away in a box so that way they won't get messed up. But that was pretty much the only touch-up that was needed for the books. For magazines themselves, you can see I have shelf file boxes. There's some behind me. Those are for the ones that are not bound as an annual compilation, like the ones we also have behind me here. Some of them, like the Rider and Driver, which if I clear this out, I can show you what they look like. The Rider and Drivers are the ones that we have that go back until 1911. These are old enough that all the staples for them have been rusted. So I essentially sat down and with I didn't count how many we had, but over 100. I sat down and I removed each staple from each of the magazines, and there was about 3 staples per magazine. But I removed all the rusty staples. I made sure that there was nothing there. I've cleaned them up. Some of them had dirt, rust marks, things like that. So I had to go through and I had to completely clean those off. And so once the staples were all removed, I basically set them in this box, wrapped them up in tissue paper, and I've laid them flat. Let's see. Yep, this is the oldest one we have, but the staples on the side are all removed, and so it's just like a little freestanding collection of paper at this point. But I've wrapped them up so that way they're just better preserved and they're better protected.
And what year is that particular publication?
This one's 1902. Yeah, so it's the oldest Rider and Driver that we have in our collection. But basically, magazines like this, especially when the staples are rusty, that's something we have to be very aware of, because the rust will leave markings on it, which is not the best. We don't really want that. And so when we lay them flat, also it avoids bending and things like that. And so laying the older magazines flat, it preserves them better, and so they can stay like that for years on end. It's a great way for long-term preservation for this library. So that's something I kind of kept in mind while I was doing that. The other one, I do have to remove some more staples from them, but the Sportalog, we have earlier collections also. Those are from the 1920s and some from the 1910s. That's the other magazine that I specifically had to go out of the way and start removing some of the staples for those. As like a librarian, I also have to continuously check all the other magazines to make sure that there's no rust, there's not a whole lot of dust piling up on them, and things like that. So that's just something I keep in mind. Kind of the same, it's a little bit easier for the audio-visual materials and stuff. Dust buildup is not as big of an issue. The CDs and DVDs and some of the VHS tapes, they also come obviously with a casing that makes it easier to kind of store those. Probably the biggest one that I have to kind of keep an eye out for are the film reels. Those are a little bit tricky with the metal casing for those. Sometimes the metal is good, other times not. It depends on what year or time period it was kind of like built. A lot of the metal casings themselves aren't great with airflow, And so sometimes the film reels, given certain conditions, they can start molding, they can start rusting, they can get into different elements and things like that. And so going through those and double checking and make sure that the film is actually usable and it's okay to kind of, it's basically still usable is something that I have to double check and go through those. All of these, however, are in great condition, which made me very happy to look at those and be able to see, you know, things that were recorded, you know, in the 1930s or something, you know, to be able to have that so well preserved was a big relief as a librarian. So we have those. What else am I missing? Let me double check. We've gone through those. I guess I can also tell you a little bit of the fun things that I've seen as I was going through this entire thing. One of the first books that I ever went through was in this back corner. I will not forget it because it was the funniest thing to me. There was a annual yearbook for a horse show in April, I believe it was 1934. And tucked away inside the pages of this book were a collection of they were like competition ribbons, like first place, second place, third place ribbons, but they were all for a livestock competition. So I have ribbons that are from 1936, Louisville. On the ribbon itself it says first place, like fat cattle show, which I thought was hysterical to find in a horse library. But the ribbons themselves were actually, they weren't even paper clipped or anything. Someone had taken a nail and had pierced the pages of the yearbook, and they had shoved the ribbon through the nail and everything. So I had to take that apart. But it was very interesting to be able to find, you know, items that we could put inside the archives downstairs within the library, because I know it was a little bit of a surprise to find particular items kind of tucked away in the pages of things as I was going through them. So let's see, these are some ribbons from 1936, and I have first, second, and third place from Marion County, amongst a couple other local counties around the Lexington area. But these ribbons were quite literally just bookmarked inside a book for who knows how long, probably since they were donated to the library. And so I've been going through, and every once in a while I'll find sort of interesting things like that kind of tucked away in the pages. My favorite thing that we've ever found was tucked away in these locked cabinets here. Literally hidden behind a row of books was just a folder. Looked like just a standard everyday, you know, file folder. But inside the pages was a collection of materials, and one of those things was it was correspondence from Harry S. Truman before he was president.
Wow.
And it was very interesting because you have his old letterhead even before he was, I think it was like a governor or something, before he was president. So this is when he was just Harry S. Truman.
Very cool.
And so it's a correspondence between him and the American Saddlebred Breeders Association, which is also downstairs. And he was asking for sort of an affidavit. He had bought a horse after the war from a general, and I believe the horse's name was King's Genius. And so this is his correspondence asking for an affidavit, so that way he can have like the registration of this horse under his name. And so it's a couple of letters. He's signed it in his own handwriting, all of this. But I definitely love the letterhead. I think it's very interesting to see just what he was doing before he was like involved in politics and everything. Yeah. A funny fact about like this whole correspondence is there is a little bit of humor to it. He forgot to include his $5 check for the registration fee, and so there's a letter
That's
that
a politician for you.
Yeah. There's one of the letters is him basically apologizing and saying he like forgot about it. So it's very cool to kind of like read through that, and that was something I was not expecting when I opened up the folder. It was very, you know, kind of pushed in the back. But we have that. We have some correspondence, not from Eisenhower himself, but a couple of his friends.
In the same folder?
Yeah, it was all in one folder. It was like a collection of like presidential materials almost. It was very interesting.
And do you know where that came from?
No, it's been here since the library's been here.
Long time.
It's certainly been a while.
We didn't know it was here.
Yeah, yeah. It looked like it might have been after the flood happened. It might have just been kind of locked away for safekeeping and then forgot about a little bit. It looks like there's a couple photos of Ronald Reagan with some of his horses and a little signed letter from him as well. Kind of just talking about his love of horses and, you know, things like that. We have some from Eisenhower. A couple of his friends were surprising him with a horse, and so the letters are them discussing what's the best way to go about giving him the actual horse. Who else? We have Reagan. That might have been it for the presidents, but it was certainly one of my favorite finds. It was kind of the biggest thing ever. It was
neat.
Couldn't even believe that was Harry S. Truman to begin with. But that was probably the best find that I have for the library. But other than that, the next steps that I have going on for the library here, like I said, is there's the digital database for that. That's through Library World, and so I'm finishing up putting all of the items online, so that way if you're looking up something, it even gives you the exact shelf that this item is located on. So, you know, if you're doing research at home and you need to come down to the library for something, you'll know exactly where it is in this room itself. Really efficient, a really easy way to kind of do your own research and also save some time when you come in. We're doing that, wrapping up the preservation for the audiovisual materials. Just last week I finished up completely reshelving all the magazines. That was a long process. I definitely got my exercise in for that day. I had to take all of the magazines off the shelves, and I basically removed the shelves themselves, completely wiped them down to make sure they were completely clean, not a speck of dust at all on them for when I put these back on, and I reformatted the shelves themselves to make sure that they were the correct height. And then I alphabetized everything here to make sure, yet again, it's easy to find. And apart from that, that's pretty much what I've been doing since January. I have a couple more little cosmetic tasks going on for these, but after that, the library is almost completed. Yeah, and that's what it'll look like once it's done.
And everything has like an accession number. I saw on the ribbons there, like a little tag. You know?
Amy went ahead and she did the accession numbers for the items and everything, since they're going to be stored in the archives.
Okay.
For the libraries themselves, the accession numbers typically are numbered through Library World. It's all virtual. And then physically we have the Library of Congress call numbers for the books.
Wow.
Yep.
Very good.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Does anybody have any questions, comments?
Amazing.
In like you said, the well, I'm lost now, but like the catalog and the program collections, how far back, or what's the earliest of each of them, do you know?
So for the sales programs themselves in the closed top boxes, the earliest I can remember is we have a Tattersalls program from 1914.
1914.
Yeah, we have a very extensive Tattersalls collection, and we do have, I think it was even before it was called Tattersalls, it was
Kentucky Saddle Company.
yes, Kentucky Saddle Company. We do have those from 1914.
Okay.
I think that's the earliest I can remember off the top of my head, but we certainly do have early 1900s
Okay.
sales programs. Same for horse show programs. Can't remember exact dates for
Okay.
those, but I believe we have one from 1911 as well.
Okay.
The horse show is slipping my mind, but we do have early collections, and then the modern day collections, especially for the horse shows, we have for the World's Championship here in Louisville, and then we also have Junior League, and those stay up to date, so
Sure.
each year we get those. So
Well, I'm glad the Tattersalls catalogs came, because the standardbred part of that got bulldozed when they razzed the building. Yeah, it was just horrible. They wouldn't let me in because of asbestos was falling out of the ceiling and everything else, but thankfully those were saved.
yeah, I know, it's very, the books up at the top corner there for the R section, those are actually handwritten logs from Tattersalls, so
Okay.
during the actual auction themselves, when the horse was auctioned off, there's handwriting of the auctioneer recording the actual price that horse was sold for. So we don't just have the programs themselves, you'll also have the
Wow.
actual official
That's
sales
cool.
logs, which
Yeah.
is very neat to me. I think we have it from the 1950s up until the 80s. We're kind of missing
Very
more of the
good.
current stuff, but we do have the older ones, which are super great to have. Especially, we have a couple of people who have asked already for, I guess, like sales. They've been calling to ask like what price a horse was sold for, and so if it was through the Tattersalls collection, or the Tattersall sale, or any sale that was through Tattersall's itself, we have them recorded if it's
That's
the
great.
exact date. So it makes it very convenient when
Yeah,
trying to answer those
yeah.
questions. But
And how much of the, because I came to the reduction sale and all, how much of it, did it all get gone or?
so from the sale in January, we still have a couple of books left. A lot of them are the
That's
red
a
books.
couple of books, that's compared to what you had there, yeah.
No, the July sale was huge. It was very great to see. We had a big turnout, a lot larger than what we had. I think we had a sale back in April or March that was a little bit smaller. You know, not a lot of people really showed up for that, but the one in July was super successful. A lot of the books we have left over are the red books, which are all the pedigree books. I think that's a fairly common collection a lot of collectors have, so not a lot of people really went for those. We do have a handful of the blue books, which I think is another large collection that typically they're easier to find. Other than that, though, we do have still a lot of duplicates. I don't know if you've noticed the back wall over here, all the Lowe's moving boxes outside of this room. Those are all duplicates that I have gone through, and as I was going through this collection, I was weeding out those duplicates. We have an entire back wall of those that I need to go through, and hopefully we'll be selling those shortly. Those are a combination of modern and also older magazines. I think we still have a couple of American Horsemen from like the 1930s or something that we just already have like a bound compilation that are in great condition, so we don't really need those duplicates, especially since this room
So
is
the big boxes are the loose ones
yes.
that are duplicates. You have a copy here,
Yes.
bound. In the okay,
Yep,
yeah,
yep,
cool.
yep. Those are all those. We do have also a couple of the bound compilations that we already have extra copies of. Typically those are in the lock cabinets, which I've not gone through completely because I'm a little too short for that one up there. But we have a couple of duplicates for those that, yet again, they're in great condition. It's just with a museum and a library that's on the smaller side, there's no reason to keep so many duplicates.
Absolutely.
I know larger specialized libraries, kind of like Keeneland, like they do keep duplicates sometimes, depending on the frequency of use, but because we're so small, it's just not something that is necessary for us, and so typically one copy is good. Yeah.
Very nice. You can sure see the space that's been freed up from the last time I was here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I wish I had before and after photos of this because it really kind of came together for me the past couple days, and I'm thinking back to how I started and everything. Like I really love kind of before and after kind of thinking about it, and it was a great process. I think it was a lot of fun to kind of be able to do and take something that it had a great foundation and kind of turn it into something that was more organized and, you know, a little bit clearer for people to use and, you know, just easier to navigate.
Absolutely. No, it looks great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. If anybody has questions online after watching this video, feel free to contact us at the library. Apart from that, thank you for coming out, and if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Sarah.
you.
That's very helpful.